This week's parsha, the prism, we are going to be discussing the concept of more of the shapes rather than color. However, it's still integrated definitely within the perspective of an artist. Obviously, color is important. However, shape and form is also certainly important in creating art as being a creative. The shapes around us, what we see around the planets, the shapes that we create here on Earth. I'd like to go into those two concepts because it's important to see form, the shapes of the trees, the houses, the blades of grass. Everything around us has importance, has meaning, and they're not just by mistake. So that the actual shape of the planets that are round, the earth that are round, the different parts on our body that have a round shape, all those ideas are not just made by mistake, rather that each one has a certain purpose and a message that we can understand and that we should understand. Seeing those through the lens of the Torah is important. So in this week's parsha, Lech Lecha, we're told that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Avram Avinu to move on from his dwelling place, a place where he grew up around family, and move towards the land of Canaan, which is Eretz Yisrael. And the phrase which was used is Lech Lecha. And this is important. The phraseology of the word Lech Lecha, not just the actual meaning of it, but the words Lech Lecha, we find in other instances. One most obvious is the concept of halacha. Halacha is a word which means law. And that is a place where we find the laws of what to do, how when we wake up in the morning, all throughout our day. And that is the idea of when we're moving, when we're going, where this idea of hiluch, when we're going through the world, we accompany ourselves with these halachot. So these halachot certainly means laws, but that word of halacha, of hiluch, is tied in to that actually word, because that concept of halacha takes us through the day, not only just through the day, but takes us through life where we're in constant motion. When a person actually finishes the completion of the Talmud, he reads from a quote where he says, Lech Lecha, this concept of moving. We bring up this idea of we're constantly moving through this world where there's constant motion. And this is something that we are and have to be aware of, that this world is a world of movement, which is called like tirud, which is just being involved in something, and a person cannot escape that. So that if a person wants to attach himself to the world of Torah, he can. If a person wants to attach himself to the world of sports, he can. A person wants to attach himself to the world of food or art, he can. A person always has to be in movement, and that's why the Gemara says when a person dies, it's a concept of Noach Nafshe, that is a final resting, because within this world, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created things in this terra firma, or the idea of the planets in this solar system that we occupy, is movement. And that Reb Tzadok HaKohen brings down in the monumental work of Risisei Laila, is that this is the reason why the world is in planets which are round, and most things that are spiritual are round. The spheros, says the Pardes Rimonim, are spherical, almost like a lens, which we're not going to get necessarily into right now, but the actual spherot, if you look at the chart, and it's important to know that this is the way where things shine through the spherot into this world, and those concepts are round. And the reason being is because something round is set in constant motion. The earth is in constant motion. The solar system is in constant motion. We, as people in this existence, are in constant motion. The Sefer, also Yisrael Kedoshim, by Reb Tzadok, brings down this concept, framed it around where we're going to be learning later on about Yaakov Avinu, where he served actually to his father Yitzchak when Avram Avinu died. I know we're fast forwarding in terms of the parshas, but he gave him a concept of lentils, which are round beans. And this concept of giving comfort to the mourner was that this world that we're living in is in constant motion, and this is just the natural cycle of life, which is definitely an interesting concept, something to discuss. Why Yaakov Avinu was giving his father this message. Didn't he know this message already? Those are all valid and important answers or questions, something to definitely think about. But the lesson learned from this, says Reb Tzadok, is that Yaakov Avinu was telling, or at least motioning, or giving something symbolic over to Yitzchak, something visual, this idea of motion. And that's why he gave him this lentil soup, which is interesting, because even today we give over to the mourner's meal something round. Either you have either eggs or the concept of bagels. As strange as that is, you get bagels. I know from my experience sitting Shiva over somebody, a loved one who was nifter, they actually bring bagels. So it's definitely a very Jewish thing. However, there's a deeper message. There's a sort of concept of giving something visual, and this definitely touched into something artistic, where you're not necessarily saying something, however, you are actually giving them this visual item to give a message. Not everything necessarily has to be given as a spoken word, but these foods that are given over to a mourner is a subliminal message, which is definitely touching on something very artistic. And so this message that we're giving over is that this idea of constant motion. Not only that, even after a person dies, we're told by our Chachamim that those people who attach themselves to something spiritual, even in the next world, are always also in constant motion. We're going from one level to the next. People down here, which is in the world of motion, could actually give a schut, a merit to those people in heaven through charity or through learning Torah, saying and being good. And that idea raises the soul, raises the neshama. It says, Mechayel el chayel. There's this idea of going from one level to the next. Again, a constant motion. However, we see something interesting in terms of shape. But that which we mentioned, the world is circular. Most objects in this world created in Hashem are circular. We see that something that is man-made is something that is square. One of the first places we see that more than often was the Mishkan, the tabernacle that was built by Klal Yisrael in the Midbar, was a place where HaKadosh Baruch Hu now can rest, a place of something very square, and that became a dwelling place. Look around us in terms of the homes that are built. Now, there are always exceptions. You'll always find some exception. Even in nature, sometimes I think a place in Ireland or in Iceland, if I'm not mistaken, hewn into the stones of a mountain are shapes that are more angular. However, the concept of something, let's say, of a house, a bias, is something that is created by man, and it's something that is rectangular, which is not this concept of something in motion. Certainly a circle of a wheel could move, but square wheels cannot move. And therefore, something that has residence, something that has permanence, is this idea of a house. And so we see that man's job in this world is to solidify his actions into something where things can be contained. We see that in last week's parsha, whether it's a teva. We see this within the idea of Avram Avinu, which is this motion, but then settling into a place of Eretz Yisrael, and certainly later, and even for us, where we create areas that are structured in a way that has more permanence, and therefore you have something created in a structure with 4 sides, 6 sides, depending how you look at what a house is. And this idea of something that can now take something that is in movement and bring it into something that is now solidified in this idea of a square. To note, the actual avoda, the service in the Beis Hamikdash, which was a place of a microcosm of the world, there was one place where it merged these two concepts together, and that was called the Beit HaMoked. And if you look in the Gemara in Tamid, and certainly in the Gemara in Yoma, this idea of where the avoda, where the service of the temple started each and every single day, was in this place called the Beit HaMoked. And one could say the chamber of fire, because there was a fire there that certainly the Kohanim warmed themselves up. But that place had a door that opened up into the actual area, the Azara, where the Kohanim would start the Tamid service, and that was the start of the day. In fact, in Hebrew, Moked is like sort of like the place of, you need like the information booth in the terms of like where things get started. And you'll find that the Beit HaMoked was the only building in the Beit HaMikdash that had a dome. And so that domed house fused down to something square. So if you look at some houses, more in ancient houses, and even you'll see this today in Tzfat, you'll have this idea of a domed roof that then merges and goes into a square structure. And I think that this idea beautifully illustrates our purpose in this world, and how we take the idea of something circular and something in movement that then fuses down into something that's more structural and something more permanent. And that, I believe, is the message of that area of the house in the Beis HaMikdash, where you have this start of something where we are given these tools of Hashem, something spiritual, which is something circular. However, it's our job as people in this world to, whether you say concretize it, to put it into structure, and to solidify it, and own it, and to give this thing permanence. And that is very important in terms of the service that we have of Hashem, where we take something and we capture it and we actually hold it. I think that it's very popular, this idea of living in the moment, to take something that we have and live in the moment. However, interesting to note that us as human beings have this inability to actually live in the moment, in the sense that the only being that is able to live in the moment is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being, because Hashem is above time. For us as humans, anything that I had just said is now in the past, and anything that I will say is in the future. However, to be really in this moment is impossible. The present, which is actually called the Hove, which has the letters of Hashem, the Hey and the Vav, and the only being that can actually be above time and in the moment is Hashem. And therefore, I believe that when people say that they're tapped into living in the moment, which is physically impossible to do, they feel this sense of belonging and menucha, rest. And that is because what in reality they're doing is actually tapping into something very spiritual. By living in the moment, you are in a way emulating Hashem. You're emulating God's ability to be just above time, where you actually say you stop and you actually are focused and you give permanence to the actual moment. That is actually very godly. And so whether for a Jewish person or a non-Jewish person, to actually cling on to and attempt to actually live in the moment is something very godly. And I think that is the reason why people have this rush of comfort that rushes over them when they try to live in the moment, because they are tapping into this thing. And the Beis HaMikdash in itself is teaching this lesson from the house of the Beis HaMoked, where it was taking something spiritual of this circular concept of form and saying, no, this is the house of Hashem. This is the area where things to get squared. And that every other structure in the Beis HaMikdash was only square. The only place that had this dome was the Beit HaMoked, where everything starts. So yes, where everything starts is something spiritual. However, it's our choice and power to make that thing permanent. And that instruction from Hashem to Avram Avinu, Lech Lecha, to move, that is the human condition, to constantly be in motion. However, go to the place of Canaan, go to a place of structure, build a tent there, build a place there where other people can then go to build this permanence, to tap into the attributes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is above that time and place. So where even HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kaviyachol, in a certain sense, has this Beis HaMikdash, which we say from Chazal, up above and below, so that in a certain way, this structure that we built down here mirrors the structure that is in Shemayim, which is more tapped into Hashem, as opposed to our spiritual condition, which is in constant motion. So this is the idea of shape and form of the circle versus the square, which is definitely connected to the artistic vision, of creative vision of always doing the need to accomplish, but to place it onto something that has structure, that has purpose in order to give this message. Just as an aside, something that I left out is that when Yaakov gave this over to Esav, he gave this lentil meal. And we know from this is that Esav took this food and did not necessarily just wait and eat it deliberately, but he actually threw it down the back of his throat, consumed it as a rejection of this idea of this concept of something spiritual. And therefore, even though he took it, he bought it outright from his firstborn spiritual birthright, that he was the eldest, he rejected any concept of something round that had anything connected to something spiritual, because he didn't want to focus on that. The focus was nothing spiritual, and therefore rejected everything that had to do with something spiritual. And that is a fault of certainly Esav, and certainly at times where we do not focus on something unspiritual. Esav was guilty of this. Certainly we're guilty of this at times. It's very hard to constantly be in the spiritual domain. However, it's something that we need to focus on, and at times, and there are glimpses through the day that we're able to tap into that. It's something that we are always constantly in motion, always constantly Torah in doing, is to know that this is our job here, is to focus on the spiritual, to take those things that are physical, merge them with the spiritual, the idea of the circle, which is the spiritual, which is the square, which is the physical, and meld those together. We could emulate God's ways. We could build a Beis HaMikdash. We could build a home, a structure where we're bringing in the spiritual into something solid, something square. And we have this idea of the circle and the square, melding those two things together. I wish you luck on your journey doing that. And please wish me luck on my journey doing that, because it's a constant avoda, it's a constant workforce that we and I have to do. Have a great job.